I was sending the email.
All right.
Hi everyone, my name's Eric, and tonight I'll be talking about whales in captivity. But before I get started, I just like to start with a question for you guys. For all of you guys, have you been to like SeaWorld or any other aquariums where there are whales in captivity? And if you haven't, have you guys seen anything on like social media or anything of like memes or anything about whales in captivity? Go ahead and raise your hands. So that's the vast majority of everyone in here. As you guys probably know at this time, it's more out there, that information, but tonight I'll be talking about three main things that are harming these animals. My main proposition is that whales in captivity suffer substantial harm both physically and mentally from being kept captive. So to start off, we're going to be talking about the whales in captivity start suffering from broken teeth. According to Corinne Hen of One Green Planet, they suffer from broken teeth from biting down on these steel gates that separate them within their tanks. This is only found in captivity and is not found in the wild, obviously, because there are not these steel gates separating them. Once these teeth are done fractured, they then have to have a procedure done called pulpotomy, which is like drilling into their teeth to get out what's been rotten without anesthetics. So if you guys can kind of imagine like a root canal, or maybe even like getting your wisdom teeth being pulled out without being put under, with nothing that's taking away the pain from you. Let's just let that sink in for a second. If you can imagine these whales that are doing all these performances for you, just sitting there with doctors drilling into their teeth. And you know, whales are big, right? So can you imagine how big their teeth are, therefore how big this drill must be? To me, that's pretty clear and painful. Next, I'll be covering West Nile virus. You guys probably haven't heard of it, but essentially it's the viruses that get brought in from mosquitoes when they're sucking the blood out of whales. And in captivity, they're very susceptible to this because the tanks that they're being kept in are much smaller and they don't have as much water as they do in the wild. So in the wild, they'll just go under the surface and kind of chill there, but then in captivity, they have to go up to the surface where they're very susceptible for the mosquitoes. Again, this is something that's only found in captivity and there's no evidence of this in the wild. Lastly, whales in captivity suffer unnecessary stress levels. According to Tracy Stadler from Life Science, they're kept in these tanks that are about 1/10,000th of their natural habitat, and they're concrete, not even like glass or anything. And then for the mothers that give birth in these situations, they're giving birth without their normal social circle, which is called their pod, which is a lot like their community or their herd. And then so for the animals, they're being brought up without their normal community and kind of without family for the most part, because if and when they are not kept by themselves, say they have like one or two in the same tank, this is rarely with their actual biological family. These stress levels result in high susceptibility to a lot of different diseases that in the wild are usually not so problematic. All in all, the legaldictionary.com defines animal cruelty as crime of inflicting pain, physical and suffering and or death to these animals. And to me, I think, just what I've been talking about, it's pretty clear that this qualifies as animal cruelty. Therefore, for me, I stand on removing these whales from captivity and hope they would join me too. Thank you.
All right, Eric, you identify what the subject is, and then you give us an attention device. I don't know why you don't just use the attention device of the question to identify the subject. You don't need to say, I'm going to talk about whales. You've got an opening. Use the quote, or the rhetorical question that you have. That would be fine. Your propositional statement is a little bit confusing. You say there are three things that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going, okay, he's going to preview what he talks about, and then you move away from those three things. You don't tell me what they are, and you say, I'm going to say that whales are harmed physically and mentally. So I guess that is the propositional statement. The problem with that is, of course, it has multiple components to it, and it sounds like there's also maybe a third claim there, so maybe that's supposed to be your preview statement, but it's been combined with the propositional statement, so that's a little complicated. So I think that you have some organizational issues that are problematic at the beginning of the speech. In the body of the speech, the secondary points basically are just terms. They're not declarative sentences, so you want to make a declarative sentence. You want to say, whales in captivity result in broken teeth. Whales in captivity have a greater chance or risk of West Nile virus. Whales in captivity have problems with birth or delivering children effectively, something along those lines. So what you need to do is you need to make inferences with your supporting points, and you're just kind of labeling topics without telling me what the claim is going to be on those particular points. The broken teeth topic, you've got a general quote on that talks about it. We've got no information about how frequently this occurs. You say there's no anesthesia when they have to do the treatment, and I'm wondering, why is there no anesthesia? Who says there's no anesthesia? This is an assertion on your part, and I'm looking for some data to support it, and I don't get any. On the West Nile virus, the same sort of thing. There's not much of an explanation about what happens and why they are subject to this. It's got something to do with the tanks and the size of the tanks, and that they're on the surface a little bit more. That's not very clear. That's all asserted, by the way, on your part. You basically say there's no evidence that they get West Nile in the wild, and you know what? There's no evidence that they get West Nile in your speech either. This is an assertion on your point, and if there's an example of some whale who got this, or that whales frequently get this, you should give us those examples in your speech, and that's missing. On the birth issue, I think you've got a good premise here that you're explaining without necessarily any follow-through on it. So in those places where whales have given birth in captivity, and so what's been the problem? Do they live shorter lives? Do they not survive? Is there some harm that occurs to them as a consequence? It's not very clear what it is that you are saying here. You're simply describing that it is a different circumstance, and you're assuming that that's automatically problematic, and I think that that's a huge assumption that you're making. So you had two quotes that I heard in the presentation. They're both okay. They're a little generic. They need some follow-up information to substantiate those claims a little bit more. Other than that, there's not a lot of information in the presentation. In the body of the speech, it's adequately organized. I could pick out what was being said. I do think that you want to be phrasing those as claims, like I said before. It feels like it's kind of a dry run through this. This really feels a little sketchy. You need, I think, a little bit more information in your presentation. All right. Thank you, Eric.